I think what's so very special with the Interact process, apart from being a long process for 3 years, is that we are establishing a working culture. We actually work together.
I believe that there were choices that different people could have made during the life of the project, and whichever choice they made could have made Interact stronger or weaker. And I think that whenever those sorts of choices had to be made, people always made the right choice.
I started kissing my Interact colleagues quite from the beginning when I met them first, and I even do not do it with my Munich colleagues now.
They come from all over Europe, from north, south, east and west. They check into their hotels and prepare themselves for the meetings. They're brought together by a project called Interact.
Interact actually is a kind of follow-up from another group that existed before within Eurocities, the Economic Development and Urban Regeneration Committee. And after this 2 years experience where we work on how to prepare integrated strategic plan, some of us of this group decided to go further with the implementation of those plans. And we took the opportunity to candidate to have some funding from the European Commission and from the 5th Framework Programme for Research and Development to do that. We were lucky to be selected.
12 cities are represented in Interact, and the members of the group meet up regularly in each city in turn. They discuss, think and cooperate in city halls. Most of them are officials responsible for the strategy and implementation of planning in their municipality. The main aim of their involvement is to encourage cross-fertilization. They try to acquire wisdom, knowledge and information through awareness of the systems operating in other cities and their own experiences. Furthermore, they want to transfer their own knowledge to others.
The cities never took a competitive attitude towards each other. They supported each other, so that if, for example, a city was struggling in the project, the other cities would rally round and offer support, advice, but most important, let that city know that they were for them, they were there for them. And I think that created an atmosphere where people were willing to talk very frankly and honestly to each other.
Because we had in the beginning, we want a real dialogue this hour. We didn't have any dialogue. It's not bad, but it's not, you don't do what you say that you are going to do.
I mean, it wasn't a dialogue, but the time was very short.
Of course,
the
I understand.
techniques of moderation is also very important here, because I noticed your colleague, he was in a very respectful position, and he couldn't interrupt the two guys. It's no critic, but it was like this, and you are somehow okay, and you are right, but anyhow, At
one point, I would have said it was developing slowly. But when I reflected on that, I realised that actually the learning process had been much more rapid and much more fundamental than I'd expected. Although we have tried to develop what we call the critical perspective in our work, which means we are always asking the question why. Why do you do things that way? Why don't you explore other ways of doing it? Why do you think it wasn't successful? And so on. So we're always asking challenging questions, but we never challenge people as individuals.
You can speak my needs. You know, Italian needs to speak to her.
As we saw before, not all the participants in Interact had any previous experience cooperating on a European level. Besides the cities that were already linked in the Eurocity project, others were making their debut as members of the network.
if I remember well, at the beginning when we met, it was the informal meeting we had, the first one. I was really, really worried about it because it was the first time for me. It was a sort of proof I was going to have, experimentation. It was so worrying that I asked my husband to come with me to Malmo, and he came. And what I felt was that it was going to be a very hard experience, very engaging, but very, very stimulating for us. That's why I decided to improve my English. It's not so perfect, but it was less perfect than now, 3 years ago. And we understood that it was a good occasion for our city to be known, more known than in the past. So I think that one of the most important reasons why we decided to be within the process was that to have a more active role at the European level, and Interact was one of the most interesting opportunities we could have.
We are so many different nations, and we are different persons, and we have very different traditions out how to communicate and hold meetings. So in the beginning, I thought that some people were arrogant to each other and put questions in a way that made me feel uneasy. And it still happens. But I know that if I know a person, which I know now, say something in a sharp way, I know it doesn't mean that he or she is critical. That's their way of debating. While in my culture, we always, even when we are not very friendly to each other, we are very polite and we pretend a little more in my culture.
There was an exchange report from 2 ladies from Utrecht, and they were including a sentence in their report about that they found all doors closed, so not locked but closed in each department. And they said it's very strange to them because in Utrecht it's totally different. And I distributed that report. And one colleague of mine said now she leaves her door open because she read the report and she thinks that work should be more funny and more interactive, and she would like to show that by opening up her door more often.
It's the moment, it's the wrong moment. It's a very wrong
Coffee break. Doesn't anybody actually have any comments on
The practitioners, a scientific committee, a training team and research students have all made a distinctive contribution to the learning process. They write critical evaluations and investigative reports. All those involved in the project want to transfer knowledge. But just how transferable is knowledge?
The visit to Birmingham, where Budapest and Brno, I think, saw lots of examples of how the public and private sector work together in city centre renaissance, examples that they're not familiar with in their country, but which I think they feel are likely to happen more and more in the future. And I think they began to see from the Birmingham experience just what the potential is for public and private sector cooperation. I think they realised that there is enormous potential for public-private cooperation, which perhaps hasn't yet begun to lift off in their countries, but that will be the way of the future for them. And I think coming to Birmingham and seeing that inspired them, but also began to show them the sorts of projects that the public sector and private sector can cooperate on.
What I remember from Birmingham was that they had some money in the 1950s and 1960s to develop the city at a time when the ideas for developed cities in Europe were quite different from the time which is now. So they developed a lot of motorways, and they created a circular motorway around the city center, very close to the city center, etc. At that time, Budapest and these socialist cities, they did not have enough money to ruin their cities in that way. And now they arrived at the beginning of the 21st century, and they start to demolish these mistakes what they committed some 50 years ago. And the real question for me was that, can we explain this to our cities, not to commit the same mistakes what they have done 50 years ago? But this knowledge is not that easy to transfer from one city to the other, because each city has a particular situation. And at that time, the Birmingham people had the feeling that they need a lot of motorways, they need a lot of roads for the cars. And the same feeling is now in Budapest, that the number of cars is increasing. It is now almost at the European Union average, or not yet, but it will come to this average. So how can we act now, knowing that the examples from other cities are not very good if they build one road after the other? So how can we transfer this knowledge into our circumstances?
It's strange, isn't it? Just to think of bees, honeybees, and to think of interact people. Honeybees, they are so essential for agriculture. And if you consider our work within the framework of Interact, it's so essential to our departments to learn from each other. We meet our group, and then we come back, or we go back to our cities with new ideas. We are very active, we produce like honey. We can fight, we can bite, or we can be sometimes tough, but afterwards we work again together, and at the next meeting we are very happy to see each other.
In an intensive learning process that reaches far beyond the formal results of the project, they need to eat and drink in moderation and to laugh a lot. An international network like this is more than a long list of phone numbers. It means relationships for business and pleasure. It means honey on the bread.